Joined now by Bryan Toporek of Forbes and Liberty Ballers. He also is the host of the NBA pod. Uh, Thank you so much for hopping on. This is a very just crazy time for Philly and Philly writers and anybody that is associated with James Harden in any way. Uh, I'm glad you're done with it. I'm honestly glad you're done.
You and me both. Thank you for having me. I honestly did not expect to be able to talk about what we're about to talk about this early in the season, but I am very, very relieved that that is the case.
I thought that Daryl Morey would be in it for the long haul, just like you. I thought that he would take this all the way down to the nub, and the Clippers would absolutely be waiting too. But sounds like they were the first to break, and he was also very excited to get what he got, and that I think makes this, at least in theory, a win-win for both sides until the Clippers actually have to play in the playoffs. But we'll see what happens. We'll see. Uh, Philly, let's start with the game that we just watched actually, and then go to the Harden trade after that. We're recording this immediately after the Sixers beat Toronto. It was very convincing. There were a lot of good layers to it. What's your initial takeaway for this game?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I'd say there's probably three big ones. One, Joel Embiid's passing to start the year has been sensational. He was leading the team with 7 assists per game in each of the first 3 games of the season. He added 7 assists tonight to go with 28 points, 13 rebounds. Under Nick Nurse, we're just seeing a lot more both ball and player movement than we saw under Doc Rivers, whose entire offense was basically just predicated on spamming the Harden Embiid pick and roll. So Embiid is actually taking advantage of this. And, he said dating back to training camp, like, this is the way he's wanted to play. I remember even last year, he like offhandedly said, I could play like Nikola Jokic if I wanted to. And everyone thought he was joking. I'm not saying he's on the like caliber of passer as Jokic. Obviously, Jokic is, on a tier of his own, especially as a big man. But we're seeing more of this playmaking gene from Embiid, which has really made the Sixers offense much more dynamic. Tobias Harris has gotten off to a great start this season, 23 points on 10 of 17 shooting, 7 rebounds, 3 assists, 3 steals against Toronto tonight, continuing
Right.
a hot start to the season for him. And Kelly Oubre Jr., man, he signs in mid-September on a 1-year vet min deal. Everyone thought like, oh, okay, the guy averaged 20 points per game last year, but on a terrible Hornets team, can he actually contribute to winning basketball? He's been really good. Like one of the free agent steals of the summer so far for the Sixers. He started tonight, as there's still, Nick Batum, Marcus Morris, Robert Covington, KJ Martin did not play, or I guess they played at the very end of the game, but they're still ramping up, getting used to this new system. So we'll see if he maintains that long-term spot in the starting lineup. Nick Nurse has said he kind of likes the spark that Oubre provides off the bench, but whether he's a starter, whether he's coming off the bench, he's been honestly something the Sixers haven't had in a long, long time.
He's been dynamic, and that's probably the thing that when you talk about what the Sixers were going to be without James Harden, Tyrese Maxey and Joel Embiid were guys that you consider dynamic, but I don't think you'd consider Tobias Harris dynamic. I don't think you'd consider D'Anthony Melton, although maybe he has some moments, but Patrick Beverly, Paul Reed is good, but he's not quite that level in terms of like, hey, you could come in and really put up 25 and also lock down the opposing team's best wing. There's a lot to like with what Kelly Oubre has provided, and we obviously talked about Tyrese Maxey in the outset. Like he rules, and it just seems like the team is playing with a little bit more freedom, with a little bit more energy, with a little bit more want to, and those all come from. I mean, well, I'm not going to speak for you. It sounds like comes without Doc Rivers and James Harden on the roster, if I'm being honest.
Yeah, the leash has been taken off, as James Harden might say.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it's a huge testament to Nick Nurse and a testament to the Sixers for buying into his system so quickly while they had this James Harden drama hanging over them for training camp, the preseason, and the first couple games of the season. Like so far, so good for Nick Nurse with the Sixers, which when they hired him, Raptors fans were like, "Oh, ha, have fun with that." And then, Sixers fans were like, "Excuse me, we were coached by Doc Rivers for the last 3 years. I'm pretty
Yeah.
sure he's still going to be an upgrade." So,
There's levels
you
to
know,
this conversation. So
yeah, exactly. Like, I will not be surprised if or when he wears out his welcome, but right now we are definitely in the honeymoon phase with him.
love that, and love a good honeymoon for sure. I think Tom Thibodeau is a great example of how the honeymoon can work initially, and
Hmm.
there's a lot to at least like in the first year of this experiment. So, okay, let's get into the Harden trade specifically. Break down for me what the Sixers got, why they did it, and how this kind of affects their title hopes.
For sure. So they got the expiring contracts of Marcus Morris, Nick Batum, Robert Covington, and KJ Martin, or Kenyon Martin Jr. Interchangeable. I don't know why. He's listed as Kenyon Martin
It's
Jr. on the NBA.com website. So that's what I'm going with.
everybody has
Uh,
a different way of approaching it. So he's
I
KJ
know. I
Martin to
know.
me.
Yeah, exactly. I know. They got a 2026 first round pick. It is the worst of the Thunder's pick, the Clippers pick, or the Rockets pick, which is top four protected. They got the Clippers unprotected 2028 first round pick. They got a top three protected pick swap in 2029, and then 2 second round picks as well. So Daryl Morey,
Wow.
dating back to the summer, went on the radio in a local Philly station and said, "Look, what we're trying to do here is either get a star player in return for James Harden, or get the pieces that will allow us to go get a star player. And not only that, but we want to, be competitive this year, which so far so good on that front. But we also want to maintain our flexibility looking ahead to next season, because right now they're in line to have upward of 50 million, potentially even $60 million of salary cap space, which is a very unique position for a playoff contender or even a title contender to have. It's usually, rebuilding teams are the ones with cap space, and then the contenders have to figure out, okay, we've maybe got a mid-level exception, or we could sign and trade for someone, but it's hard to make that big splash. If the Sixers don't make the big splash by the trade deadline, they're going to the offseason with, hey, we can actually sign, even a guy with 10 plus years of NBA experience. We will have enough cap space to sign him to a max contract if so desired.
And it wouldn't be a bad idea to wait and just, I mean, not necessarily punt on this season, but give Maxey as much of a runway to continue improving and continue doing what he needs to do to become the all-star caliber player that he seems to be well on his way to being. It would give them an opportunity to then save those assets, sign somebody at that point, and then use those assets to add even more at the trade deadline of the next year. So they do need to have, or at least like this deal, it gives them at least a little bit of flexibility, a little bit of leeway to pick and choose the direction that they want to go and not make the mistake of jumping the gun too soon. So if
Mm-hmm.
I'm Daryl Morey in this situation, this is the first time where I can really say, yeah, you should be patient. Like the other times, I was a little bit skeptical on the actual patience level, but now this is where you be patient as long as Embiid says it's okay. He may not say it's okay to be patient.
Yeah. It's funny because Maury actually spoke with reporters Wednesday after the trade went down, and he said he would actually prefer to use the cap space early, which I think would interpret as by the trade deadline. I think you're right. There are pros and cons to each approach. If you wait till free agency and then go after an OG Anunoby or a Pascal Siakam, then, as you said, you're not giving up the draft picks. So, why go to Toronto and offer everything you just got from the Clippers when you can sign these guys 4 months later? The counterpoint to that is to clear all of that cap space, you've got to renounce the rights to either everyone or almost everyone. I'll have an article on Liberty Ballers, I think on Friday, that's going to run through some of these permutations. Like there is a scenario where they could keep the cap holds of Maxey, Melton, and KJ Martin and still have enough to max out OG Anunoby. But after that, you've got an $8.1 million room exception and then veteran minimum contracts. So
Right.
can you actually round out your roster to have a championship level core beyond, you'll have, again, maybe Maxey, Melton, Martin, whoever the star free agent is, Embiid, you'd still have Paul Reed, you'd still have Jaden Springer, but is that enough? Or do you make this move now, or by the trade deadline, and then you can keep the cap hold of a Tobias Harris on the books as well, and potentially re-sign him and keep the cap hold of the guys that you just got from the Clippers. So it's a really interesting balance for them to strike, and how like the stakes are enormous, because you're totally right. If they screw this up, it could be, does Joel Embiid ask out next summer, or at some point in the next 1 to 2 years? So they know they have to get this move right, and I agree. They can't aggregate the contracts that they got from the Clippers until January 1st. So for the next 2 months, we will get to see Tyrese Maxey in this expanded role. We'll get to see if Joel Embiid can keep up this level of playmaking, if Tobias Harris can maintain this level of aggression, if Kelly Oubre Jr. can, maintain his hot start to the season. DeAnthony Melton has not been great offensively. Can he get going? Can Paul Reed get going? They have a lot of questions to answer with the guys currently on the roster. But, Morey and Elton Brand and the rest of the front office also have to start looking around the league at which teams might be blowing it up, and how much is it going to cost, and what's the right move? Is it right to do this now, or should we wait until the summer? Again, there are pros and cons to each approach, and I think it sets up a very fascinating, anywhere from 3 to 8 months for the Sixers.
We'll have plenty of time to discuss other trade targets. Hopefully, this hasn't happened in between now and then, for our next check-in in about 6 weeks or so. But I want to focus in, final thing here, on the in-season tournament. Sixers are in a group right now with Detroit, Indiana, Atlanta, and Cleveland. Curious as to just your overall takeaways from the in-season tournament push that the league has put out this year, and do you have any takes?
Yeah, I don't get why so many people are against it. There's no downside, right? Especially these group play games are just regular season games with a different court and different jerseys. But other than that, it's the same game that you're going to tune into anyway. And then once we get into the knockout bracket, I don't know, it could be really cool. This might be our only taste of actual playoff style basketball until April, or until later in the season. And, sometimes we see these regular season games, even, Clippers Lakers last night was really fun and had playoff caliber intensity. And when these happen, we're all like, oh man, I wish we could see this more often. Who's to say that once we get into the semifinals or the finals of the in-season tournament, and $500,000 is on the line for each player, which, for the superstars in the league, that is chump change. But for a guy on a minimum deal, or a guy on a rookie contract, that might be a fourth of your paycheck this year. You're going to actually want to win this for your teammates. So I'm not saying it's going to be the best thing ever, but I'm on board with it. I just don't see the downside to it. And I don't get why people are so up in arms about how dare they ruin the sanctity of the regular season, when all of us have been saying for the last few years, the regular season doesn't really matter.
Yeah, there's been, I firmly agree with you. And I've had this conversation with some other folks too. This is going to be fun. And I think a lot of people are going to be very pleasantly surprised by it. It's just because it's new. It's just because people haven't experienced it before. The play-in got some general queasiness from a lot of the fan base, and then who'd have thunk it? It turned out to be awesome, and there's plenty of reasons for people to be tuning in at that point. So this should be interesting. Not necessarily a fan of the courts and all the distinguishing jerseys. Denver's jersey was just despicable. But I mean, we'll have to play that by ear and see what happens. But I'm looking forward to it. It should be a lot of fun. Any final takeaways before we get out of here?
No, I mean, we'll see. I know Cleveland, especially as in Philly's group, has been kind of injury ravaged to start the year with Darius Garland and Jared Allen. So hopefully those guys can get back in the next few weeks, and we see a full strength Cleveland team in that bracket. Because otherwise, I mean, if they can't, that group feels like Philly's to lose. I know Atlanta's pulled out of the early season slow start. with all due respect to Detroit, I don't think they're a real threat. And Indiana is fun and frisky, and I'm actually very excited to see how they match up against this swarming Sixers defense. But yeah, I'm excited for it. I'm on board, and honestly, I'm just psyched that every time we get to talk about the Sixers this year, I don't have to talk about James Harden anymore.
Hey man, it's the gift that keeps on giving, and in both ways, both ways for sure. So
It really is.
should be fun. I think the Sixers are a good bet to win this thing. So should be fascinating to see. But he is Bryan Toporek of Forbes Sports, Liberty Ballers, and host of the NBA Pod. Bryan, thank you so much for taking the time. I look forward to chatting with you in 6 weeks or so.
Yes, sir. Thanks as always, Ryan.